If you look at Japanese and European companies, there are 10 or 15 of them that have been around for 500, 600 years. So maybe there's
More.
something or more. Yeah. So maybe there's something interesting about these old companies that have been around for a long time that we can learn from as it relates to sustainability and being able to survive in the future as well. Can you expand on that for us a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So the oldest business in the world is from the 500s. So it's been around for almost 1500 years.
There you go. I'm
And
not good at
then,
public math.
oh, it's okay. They're so old. It's incredible. And then the next four are also Japanese and have been around since the 700s. Right.
Wow.
So I think when I saw these, when I saw this and I learned about this, it really made me think maybe we need to expand on the definition of sustainability, right? Because I think it's safe to argue that if they've been around for that long, they are sustainable businesses.
Yeah.
They have sustained themselves over hundreds and hundreds of years. Right. So I started thinking into why is that? Who are these companies and what do they do right? And what can we learn from them? And so the oldest is a construction company. And then I think the next four are all hotels.
Yeah.
And so it's really interesting. And then I think there are I can't remember the data, but there are so many old businesses in Japan, even beyond these top 5. So there's something to say there. And a lot of it has to do with human connection.
Yeah.
So it comes back to that, right? And so, for example, the Ise Shrine, which is not the oldest, but they've been around since the 7th century. So it's the most respected Shinto shrine in Japan. So Shintoism is a native Japanese religion. I think it's pretty similar in terms of its belief in spirits, that everything has a spirit. So the belief in animism to Native American beliefs. And it's oneness with nature. So people are considered to be part of nature. There's no God, like the Christian God. Yeah. And the kami are really not gods. They're more like spirits. So the rock has a spirit, the waterfall has a spirit, the mountain has a spirit. And so it really is still it's still very ingrained in Japanese people's psyche.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Zen Buddhism. So Japanese people are interesting because we have a mishmash of beliefs and ideas. Yeah. And I think it works, right? Because it's really about incorporating new things in a way that it doesn't conflict it with anything. So it's more about how do you adapt new ideas and incorporate it. That's really the way that Japan has always been.
That should be the definition of sustainability. That right there, just your ability to pivot and what's going on in the macro world without losing focus of that connection to your human client. So when you look at the oldest companies, they're hotels, restaurants, pubs, breweries, and wine companies. So to your point, they all deal with people. So if that's your core, your ability to navigate and pivot around what's going on in the macro makes you sustainable.
Yeah. And I think, kind of going into religion, monotheism tends to be exclusionary, right? You either believe in it or you don't. But Asian religions are more like philosophies, and they're more like guiding principles. So you don't have to believe in it or not. It's more like using it as kind of a guideline. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not exclusionary. Yeah. And especially in Japan, you can, people go to Shinto shrines for New Year's. You do Buddhist funerals. We eat Christmas cake. I mean, it doesn't really matter. Yeah. It's really more about spirituality than religiosity. Mm-hmm. And so, the Ise Shrine example is really interesting. And I think it's a perfect way to think about sustainability because it's rebuilt every 20 years. And the reason is, one, because, buildings don't last forever. It's not made of concrete. So it has to be rebuilt, but they break it down and then they send the different pieces of wood to different parts of Japan. And because Ise Shrine is so respected, people want, like the other shrines want this wood, and they can say, this wood came from Ise Shrine. So it's reused and repurposed. And the second reason why they're rebuilt every 20 years is so that you can pass on the knowledge of how to build and rebuild to the next generation.
Nice.
And so they purposely rebuild it before it needs to be rebuilt so that they can pass on the knowledge. And so I think, to me, that spirit of human connection and passing something on directly to the next generation creates this mentality of really respecting not just the building, but people and your ancestors and their wisdom. And I think that's really kind of what's missing from the current Western framework of sustainability, is the spirit or the mindset of sustainability. And I think people are starting to pay attention to the Native Americans and how they talk about nature and their relationship with nature, which I think is, in some ways similar to the Shinto way of thinking about nature.
Yeah. And a couple interesting points there. Going back to your point that there's an inclusive philosophy here baked into Shintoism. Like, there's nothing controversial about saying that humans are of nature and like we're connected with the universe and we're made up of the universe. And I think, so number one, that's a great kind of philosophy because it's completely consistent with everything we know about science. And number two, I think it makes it easier to care about things beyond yourself. If you see yourself as this little sort of atomized unit, like moving through reality, discrete from reality, not made up of the universe, but something, separate from it, it's just a much larger gulf to cross to get you to care about anything beyond yourself,
Yeah, and I think that's why the relationship between religion and atheism in this country is interesting. And it's another way that this country is polarized, right?
Yeah.
Like evangelicals and then like hardcore atheists. And I think it's interesting. I keep seeing over and over that people who go to college and become woke become hardcore atheists, right? They just believe in science. They think anybody who believes in religion is silly or foolish or they don't really understand how the world works. But if you think about how science started, the history of science, modern Western science, it started with trying to understand God's creation better, like understanding nature better for religious reasons. And so I think, we need to go back to that kind of connection that people felt with nature. We don't, like, science and religion doesn't have to be dichotomous, I don't think.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? And I think that kind of mentality is toxic, and it creates unnecessary conflict between people. And so, again, it's like, what is the ultimate objective? Is it to prove the other person wrong? Or is it to work together and collaborate together so we can build a better future? And so I think religion can be a force for good too. It's just how do we interpret it? How do we think about it? And then how do we combine it with science?